which I like to bring a lot of history into it, but not for the purpose of history, not for the sake of history, but for the purpose of using the historical things in the Bible to teach us today what God is telling us to do today. Okay? So I'll give you a preview of where we're going to go with this. I said I was going to do Life of David. I think we're going to kind of shift that a little bit. David's going to be very heavily involved in what we're doing, but it's going to be far more about what is the government God wanted in the church. Okay? We're going to begin in the book of Judges. Okay? And in the book of Judges, I'm going to show who the judges were, how they operated in Israel, and how they were the government that God wanted. Now later, Israel's given a king. But as you'll see, Israel only got a king because they asked for a king, and God told them at the time, you are rejecting my government by asking for a king. And unfortunately, what we have nowadays is most churches are run by a leader who is a king rather than what we see as a judge. But we're going to need to talk about what a judge is first. All right, so to begin with, I'm going to go back in history. I'm going to go back about as far as we can go. Let's go back to the birth of the universe, okay? That's not a joke, all right? We know that the universe was originally created as a physical creation that then sprang into being and then became what we know now. The earth, the sun, the moon, stars, animals, things like that, okay? We call our physical bodies the flesh. Now, think of it this way. When God created the physical creation, there was one thing missing in the physical creation, and that is the physical creation has no choice. Lions have no choice what they do. Rocks have no choice what they do. There's no choosing. So God wanted beings that had the ability to choose him, and that's the crux of everything that's going on with us here today. We are beings who can choose God, we can reject God. And scripturally, when we talk about making free will choices, we're talking about love. Now, just so you know, the concept of love is so foreign to our minds, love being an absolute choice for somebody else out of a free will, that there literally, in the Bible times, was no word for it, and there really isn't a word for it today. So Paul had to actually create a word, or use a word that was used for something else called agape. How many of you heard the term agape love? Yeah. That word, by the way, does not encompass God's love. It just was a word that Paul had to kind of grab out of somewhere and say, I need a word for this. Because as fleshly creatures, we don't tend to have words for spiritual things, do we? Because the Spirit doesn't come till later, until you're born again. Mm-hmm. So a lot of things happen in the Spirit we don't have words for, and it's one of the hardest things to describe what's happening in the Spirit. Okay? So we've talked about this before. It's been some of my messages here, that we don't have words to describe these things. So Paul took a term that just kind of meant charity, like giving to the poor, and he pressed it into service and said, this is God's love. God so loved the world, he freely gave his only begotten Son with no intent of return, right? So that is love. And God wants love. I want you to think of it like this. You know, you've got a little child, and you give him some Legos, you give him building blocks, Tinker Toys. If you're from my generation, anybody remember Tinker Toys? Okay. I built a lot of stuff out of Tinker Toys. And you give him little walking robots and stuff. But there finally comes a time when he comes to you and says, Dad, Mom, I want a puppy. Well, why does he want a puppy? Because he wants something that can love him back. And it's the same way with God. He wants creatures, he wants beings that can love him back. Okay? And the essence of this is what we call free will. And it is the absolute essence of why we're here. We are here as beings that have free will, stuffed into a physical body that is at odds with the Spirit. Everything about your body is at odds with the Spirit. Okay? So, my body, which is my servant, or should be, when my body runs out of food, it says, feed me. right? When an animal's body runs out of food, it says, feed me. If the Spirit of God says, fast, there's a conflict, isn't there? Right? And we're in this perpetual state of conflict between the flesh and the spirit, because the spirit, which should want to serve God, is in conflict with the flesh, who wants its own things. The flesh just says, I want this. I want money. I want whatever, okay? I want these things. The spirit may say, yes, it's time to eat. The spirit say, yes, it's time to make money to give to those who have need. There's a time for that. There's times and places for these things, but the spirit must be in control. Now, what God wants is he wants us with our free will to choose him over everything else. Now, I'm going to make a point here that I think you'll see my point, is the more free that decision is, the more it glorifies God. I'll give you an example, okay? So I was just texting with an old friend of ours from San Francisco, Vicki Ilian, used to be John Brown. Vicki, you're probably going to see this, because I just texted her just recently, so I'll send this to her. Vicki Dombrowski now, I believe. She's married and living in Texas. But she told me about what the Russian Gospel Church in San Francisco, which is a powerful church. They go out on the streets with us, witnessing in San Francisco. We had a great time. And I think it was Vicki told me. It was one of the people from her church. But she said, for years, our church would hear these stories in Russia of some Christian that had been arrested for being a Christian. Now they're in the Gulag. And they're holding revival in the Gulag. And they're preaching the gospel, and other prisoners are getting saved. And they're the most powerful force in that prison. So we would work hard, and we would petition the Russian government. We'd say, send them over here. We'll take care of them. You can clear out your Gulag, save the money that you had, taking care of these prisoners. Send them over here. We would like to have them. We'd be blessed to have them. So the Russian government would comply. They'd send these Christians over to San Francisco. They said, as soon as they got over to San Francisco, these guys said, oh my goodness, the freedom here. And the first thing you see, they'd be out preaching on the street corners, all the preaching they were never able to do in Russia, out of the Gulag. And then they'd realize nobody was listening to them. So they'd go get a job. And then after a while, they'd be making money. And then they'd buy a TV set. And then they'd discover football. And before you know it, you wouldn't even see them at church anymore. And she said something that broke my heart. She said, we finally realized it was better for us to leave them there than to bring them here. It was better for their souls to leave them in the Gulag. Let me tell you something. Yes, if you do not serve God and you're his, the times will come when he will knuckle you down and he will make you bow your knee to him. Amen? Amen. Isn't it better if you bow your knee voluntarily? I've for years, I'm not a writer, so if anybody's a writer here, you can steal my idea. I thought about writing a book on a modern day Job. You know how Job had everything taken from him? I would love to see someone write a book where the devil goes to God and says, God, I'm going to do it opposite this time. Let me take your servant and give him everything. And now see if he serves you. And now see if he serves you. Okay? So, free will is what everything we're doing here is about. Trust me, the day's going to come 1,000 years from now, 1,000,000 years from now, Jesus is going to come back. We're either going to be raptured or we're going to die, whatever. Doesn't matter. We're going to leave this place. And we're going to be up there 1,000 years from now. And everything we think is important here on this life is going to be gone. And the only thing that's left is going to be us and Jesus and the decisions we made for him. So, when God designed his government, and we're going to see this in the Judges, God designed a government that maximized free will choices. God designed a government based on freedom. The people in the book of Judges time, were given absolute freedom under the judges. And God said, you have the chance. There's nothing to stop you. There's nothing to hold you back. Just choose me. Just choose me. And he did that by setting up a governmental structure where judges were only raised up in the times of need. And when that time was over, the judges disappeared back into the woodwork and let the people have freedom. Now, I'm going to make some comparisons here as we go through this study, and this is just the first. But I'm going to tell you, I firmly believe that the United States Constitution was inspired by God. I don't think it's scripture, don't get me wrong, but I think it was inspired by God. And the way the Constitution of the United States was written was to give us maximum freedom so we could serve God. And to raise up a nation where people were not pressed into serving God, where people were not thrown in prison and were forced to cry out to God in prison, but where people could sit in fatness and in luxury and say, still will I serve him. Still will I serve him. And we are in that day today. God has given us a unique opportunity. That opportunity, the window's closing, isn't it? But we're still in that opportunity that we can serve God freely. We are not being pressed like other people in the world are being pressed to be forced to serve him. We're not being put in prisons yet. We're not having our possessions taken away yet. To this day, right now, I believe, we in the United States of America can give God the greatest praise on the face of the earth by worshiping him with our whole hearts, even in the midst of the greatest blessing many nations ever had. And I'm so full of it. I want to encourage you guys. I want to encourage you guys to grab this opportunity, to put aside whatever so easily besets you and say, yet will I serve the Lord. I will turn away from the most wonderful things that man has to offer, the most amazing TV shows. I will turn away from all these razzle-dazzle things going on, and I will spend my time serving the Lord. Amen? Yes. Now the judges, because of the nature of who they were, okay, and the way God raised them up, I wish we had a larger board. We actually would have gotten one. We can't find a place to put it. This we can store. So anyway, the judges led in such a way that they only came in when they're needed. They got the people out of trouble, and then they left them saying, now you can serve the Lord freely. So comparing this to the modern day and the church, because these things are an example to the church, a good leader in the church is one who encourages you to serve God to your maximum ability. Now that's as opposed to a king. We'll get to the kings probably next week. The kings are ones who take charge and tell you what to do. They're ones who say, oh, we need a blah, blah, blah. You do this.
That's the Democrats.
Thanks, Bob. So, judges, which is God's proper leadership for his church, are ones who maximize, they lead in such a way so it encourages you to find out your call, your ministry, and then they encourage you to walk in it.
Amen.
So I want to take about 5 minutes, and if just at each table, I'd like you guys to take a few minutes and discuss among yourselves different leaderships that you've seen in the church. If you can't think of one in the church, think of a boss maybe. And what characteristics did you see in the pastors / leaders that you would say led to this of encouraging you to be what God wanted you to be? So how did they exemplify what we might say it was a judge? So go ahead at a table. If your table has too few, maybe somebody wants to move over, whatever. But just take a few minutes, talk among yourselves, and I want you to write, let's say maybe 3 things, 2 or 3 things that you say, okay, I had a pastor, he did this, he did what you're talking about, and here's what I saw in him that led to that. So we're thinking of characteristics of church leaders, characteristics of church leaders that would lead, that exemplified them trying to bring out your free will choices to help you grow as a Christian into your ministry. These characteristics that you've seen in pastors that worked effectively in drawing out your ministry. Let's go ahead and start the back table back here. So, a couple of things. What do you guys think?
We have being real.
Being real. Okay.
Obedient.
Okay.
Obedient.
Obedient. Okay. Okay.
Transparency.
All righty.
I want to know what church you went to. I want to go there.
And being approachable. Approachable.
What's that?
Being approachable.
Okay.
And we were getting more that it was coming from a youth minister.
Okay.
Because you know how kids are.
It's probably true that youth ministers do tend to exemplify these traits a little bit more. Okay. Okay, this table here. What do you guys have to add to this?
I took a few notes.
Okay.
Well, is it Sherry or Shirley? Shirley, yeah. Shirley was saying that a church she went to down in Whittier, the pastor was actually very, very open with encouraging her to pursue evangelism, but also to minister. Even he gave his pulpit up, apparently, right? Is that right? To let her teach or
Okay.
share. And so there was, it seemed that he knew how to draw things out.
Is it encouraging?
Right? Surely he knew how to draw it out of you.
And he shared his authority.
He shared
Okay.
his, yeah. That's a big step. He was prophetic. Yeah.
Okay, willing to share his authority. Okay. Anything to add there?
Encourage people to find their gifts and share their gifts.
Okay.
Provide opportunities for a person to grow in their gifts.
Okay.
And provide places for fellowship.
Okay. Okay. And let's see. This table?
We haven't experienced any of that. We want to know what if this is actually experiences. Is this a wish list?
Okay. Could be a wish list.
There
There we go.
We were just when we were talking here, I think from our perspective, we were saying that we have never come across a leader that tried to encourage us in our gifts.
Okay.
They've encouraged us to do what we do, you know what I mean, when it comes to worship. But as far as drawing the gifts out of others, it seemed to be restricted to the pastor to do.
But wouldn't you say you always felt that was where it was supposed to be? Didn't you always feel that's where it was supposed to be?
No.
Never?
No, never.
Not once? You like to be told what to do, huh?
No, I didn't like it. No,
Okay.
I mean, we love worship, that's a calling. But I'm talking about for us, we've sensed more of a spirit of control in the churches we've been in.
Which would be a king, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And
Be a
so the
king.
churches have not have been encouraging others. I'm talking about individuals to find their gifts and to encourage them to operate in their gifts. Because it's something much better. We've only been in 3 churches, but in every other church, the pastors have been threatened by anyone moving in there. So it was that was a difficult for us personally. You know,
Yeah.
and that's just being honest.
Now, just so you know, while I'm saying this, I am not criticizing churches where the pastors were kings. You know why? Because God gave them a king because they asked for it. They were not created as kings. God made them kings because they asked for it. We'll get to that hopefully next week. Okay. Okay.
We have a passage that told us, be yourself, don't try to be anyone else.
Okay.
Especially if you speak. And we have a nice pastor that likes to joke around, so it teaches a lot of jokes.
Is that about Pastor Tom?
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Trying to think how to say that a joking around.
And it's always good to have a pastor that walks the walk, talks the talk, and does what they say they're going to do.
Okay. Yeah.
If you see them on the streets, they're the same way when they're in church. Except Bazilli sometimes.
Okay. So what do you guys think? Is that a good list of what we would hope a leader in the church would be?
We missed one, and it
Yeah.
was accountability.
Accountability. Okay.
That's the problem with the king.
That's the problem with the king.
With the king, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna leave this up for a minute. If you're the taking notes, want to write it down. And while you're finishing that up, so I'm gonna need to erase it in a minute, and we're gonna put a bunch more stuff up here. I'm gonna tell you a story. What? I'm gonna leave it up for a minute while people write it down. We're gonna take a picture. I like that. I learned that in the classroom. Every student I have has a cell phone. I write notes, take notes, and then click. Like, yeah, you kids. Well, Mr. Dennison, we need to take a picture. Okay, some of you may know a man by the name of Bob Jones, not Bob Jones University, it's a different Bob Jones, a very prophetic man. And he had a lot to do with raising up the church in Redding, California, Bethel Church. And he told a story that some of you have heard this. So if it's growing hair by now, you know, sorry if you've heard this before. But Bob Jones was in South Carolina, and he was praying. And God told him, said, I want you to go to the West Coast, and you're going to raise up 3 eagles' nests. And he said, what do you mean eagles' nests? And God said, an eagle's nest is where eagles are trained. He said, what most pastors want a chicken coop. And the reason they want a chicken coop is because they can put a fence around it, and they can keep the chickens in. They can give the chickens an illusion of freedom because they can flap around, but the fence is always just high enough they can't get out of, so that the chickens never leave their little farm, never leave their little fenced area, their little prison. They don't realize they're in prison because they can run across the yard and back, and they don't realize they're chickens either. And he said the reason that most pastors want a chicken coop is because they want eggs for breakfast and chicken for dinner. And it's about their security and their comfort more than it's about the people's growth. He said an eagle's nest is a place where eagles are raised to be eagles with the knowledge that most likely the day is going to come where they're going to fly away and leave the nest. And an eagle's nest needs to be prepared in such a way to take the loss of the people they have raised up flying off to greater ministries than they had in their own church. And he did. He found 3 churches, one of which is Bethel. He stayed at Bethel for 2 years, and that was actually the beginning point of the ministry of Bethel Church, which many of you have heard their songs, maybe have been there, okay? So, I would say that for the most part, Bethel Ministries probably fits a lot of these because they have sent out possibly hundreds of ministries, haven't they? Powerful ministries that have changed the world. Okay? So, let's look in the book of Judges. So if you get your Bible out, let's start in Judges chapter 2. Okay, and in Judges chapter 2, first of all, let me make a comment right at the beginning of Judges chapter 2, because in the first verse it says, "The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochum and said, I brought you out of Egypt and led you into the land I swore to give your ancestors. I said, I will never break my covenant with you." And let me tell you this as believers, God will never break his covenant with you. But being in his covenant is not always wonderful. Being in God's covenant is the greatest thing ever if you serve him. If you don't serve him, you may end up worse than the world. Okay? You guys get that? He made a covenant. His covenant was he would do whatever it took to make them to be the people of God they were supposed to be. If they were disobedient, they had greater judgments on them than the world around them who was not in covenant with God. So, as one person put it to me one time, or I heard him talking about it, he said, once you get saved, your life changes. It will never be the same. If you serve God, it will be the greatest thing that ever happened to you. If you fall away from him, you will be the worst that you've ever imagined. You know what's worse than being a sinner? Being a backslidden Christian. That's way worse. Okay, that's way worse. So we don't want to be like that. We want to press on. Now in Judges chapter 2, you start seeing the cycle that's repeated all through the book of Judges. And it goes something like this. After Joshua passed on, and Joshua was essentially the first judge. Okay, so after Joshua passed on, it says in verse 10, after that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he'd done for Israel. Then the Israelites did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger. Notice, they aroused the Lord's anger. Was the Lord angry with the other countries around who were already serving the Baals? Not near as much as he was angry with them. Okay? Okay? Said, because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtaroths. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. It did not matter how strong they were. If they did not serve the Lord, they lost. And they lost every time. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. Then they were in great distress. Then the Lord raised up judges. By the way, the word judges actually just meant leader for the most part. They did judge like a judge we would think of today, but primarily they were a leader. You could even think often a military leader. Okay? So when you hear the term judges, try to get out of that mindset of just these were guys in black robes that sat, in Judge Judy's courtroom or something. These were leaders out fighting the wars. The Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of the raiders. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshipped them. They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors who'd been obedient to the Lord's commands. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of the enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groanings under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to the ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and ways. Therefore, the Lord is very angry at Israel again. So, shampoo, rinse, repeat. Shampoo, rinse, repeat, right? And so this cycle went on and on. Now, I would ask you a question. What do you think would have happened if they had just kept serving the Lord? How would this cycle have been different? Would have changed everything, wouldn't it?
Probably wouldn't have the chaos we have today.
Probably not.
The way kids are being taught about stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Israel's mission was to bring the word of God to the nations. God gave that to them as a mission.
Yeah.
And they lost it.
And they didn't accomplish it.
Yeah. No, it says in Romans that they're the oracles of God.
They could have not only have had prosperity themselves, but they could have brought the whole world into a better place. I mean, the responsibility on them was enormous, but the power was there too, wasn't it? But, so what happened? Whenever they needed someone, whenever they needed leadership, God would raise this person up. Now notice what I said. God raised this person up. God raised this person up. God raised this person up, right?
Yeah.
Where did kings come from? Daddy was a previous king, wasn't he? Did God raise up kings? No. Kings inherited their position. Under the judges did not pass the judgeship down to their sons, did they? God raised them up, gave them supernatural wisdom, gave them supernatural authority. So, as I was just casually reading this, I kept, every time I think of something, I write it down. So I have pages of stuff here. I'm going to try to condense down into a few, okay, of what was different between a judge, how being under a judge is like. Okay, first of all, and this gets back to our free will, being under a judge was voluntary. Okay? Remember the story of Gideon, right? Gideon says, we need to go to war. 30,000 men show up. What does Gideon say? If you don't want to be here, go home. Whew, 90% unbelief. Okay? And then Gideon, God gives him another test. See if they lap like a dog at the stream, or if they pick up the water with their hands. Now, what's that having to do with? If you're bending down and putting your face in the water, you're not being watchful, are you? If you're picking the water up with your hand, drinking it like this, you're watching. Now, was it just that? Probably. Or was it also just God needed some way to separate them, and that was the way to separate down by another 10? Okay? But it was voluntary. Judge called for a war. I don't want to go. Don't feel like it. Not voluntary to follow a king, is it? If he says go to war, he means go to war. Okay? Let me see how I'm going to word this second one here. Judges led from the front. Okay? Judges led from the front. A couple of reasons for that. Number one, that's the only leadership that matters. Okay? If you want to lead someone, you need to be out front. Here's the way I like to think of a leader. Here's a leader, here's the people following. Leaders. Oh, guys, watch out for that pothole there. Okay, that's a big one. Oh, don't get your foot stuck here. See, that's a leader. When you play follow the leader, who's out front?
Leader.
The leader is not sitting in an armchair behind saying, you guys go that way. Can you hear me? Is that leadership? Leadership of the church is, I'm out front. Let me tell you something God told me years ago, because I did pastor for a little while. Wasn't very good at it. Okay. In the long run, my administrative skills weren't great. But God spoke to me one day, because I was always, kind of naggy at people. You need to pray more. You need to fast more. You need to do more. And I'm not saying be like me. I know I'm nuts, okay? I understand that. Billy comes in this morning, are you okay? Like, no, not really, Billy. I've been fasting too long. But God spoke to me and he said, if you want people to pray 15 minutes a day, you need to pray an hour. If you want people to pray an hour today, you need to pray 3. If you want people to fast a day, you need to fast 3 days. If you want people to fast 3 days, you need to fast 10. If you want people to fast 10 days, you need to fast 40. I've never forgotten that. We lead, not by example, but by leading. This is not a matter of example.
Who was that? Who said that to you?
God. I never heard that from anyone else.
Good answer. I missed that part.
Sorry, Paul.
Praise the Lord.
I've never heard anyone else say that, so I guess it's me.
It's pasta.
Yeah.
Yeah, Billy said that to me.
As he was asking if you're okay.
So, judges had no authority outside of God. God told them what to do. They tried to tell people anything else. People go, no, we don't need to do that. And they tried not to step outside of those bounds. And if they did, it didn't go well for them. Yeah. Judges, read the book of Judges, it's a mixed bag. You've got Gideon, you've got Samson. Okay? Some succeeded gloriously, some failed gloriously, because they were men too. They were men too. Okay? But their authority came from God. Their authority did not come from them, did not come from their position. Okay? Some little things. Let's get political here for a minute. Judges didn't tax. If you're under a judge, you got to keep your money. With the assumption you'd use it properly, right? No taxes. Judges had no standing army. Okay? What that meant was after the war was over, guess what happened? You went home. You went home to your wife and kids. Went back home to your TV. Or whatever was there.
They didn't have back then.
That's true.
Just watch the goats.
Oh, with him, guys. Watching the goats come and go, right? Okay? They only fought defensive wars. Okay? There's two types of wars, offensive and defensive. One is to protect the homeland. One is to go get new territory. No judge ever fought an offensive war in the Old Testament. Kings did. Would you be willing to you would be willing to put your life on the line to defend your family. Would you be willing to put your life on the line just to expand somebody else's kingdom? They had no standing army. They only fought when it was to protect themselves. Interesting, huh? Okay. They only went to war when God said. Should I even add that? I'll just say it. They only went to war when God told them to. They only did what God told them to do. Okay? They often had day jobs. You see Samuel. Samuel was probably the greatest of the judges. Okay? Samuel kind of puts it all together as far as judgeship goes. Where does Saul find him? He's sitting prophetically answering people's questions till Saul comes to pay him, right? And ask him, where are my dad's donkeys? That's a job. It's a job sitting there all day giving people answers, and they give you, what do you give, a quarter of a shekel? How many of these interactions do you have to make at a quarter of a shekel piece to have a day's pay? Worked at a day job. Many of them did. Not all of them, but many of them did. Okay? And judges were of the people.
For the people.
Of the people and for the people. They rose up from the people. If they did their job correctly, they disappeared back into the people, didn't they? Okay? They did not have a continuing kingdom. Let me tell you something. Because people are people, many of the judges tried to pass their judgeship on to their children, and it did not go well with them. Read the book of Judges. You see Eli. You see, trying to think of all the ones. You see some of the different ones. All of the ones that tried to raise up their children to take their places, their children ended up dead. Because that's not what God said. That's not what God wanted. It's an ugly. I'll tell you this. If I were speaking to a room full of pastors, I would say, train your children in jobs. Do not try to train them to take your place. If they're called to take your place, they will. If they're not, don't try to make it happen. Teach them how to go to college. Teach them how to become senators. Teach them how to become governors. Teach them how to become educators. Do not try to force them into your calling just because they're your children. Do not build hierarchies. Do not build dynasties. It's not God's way. Amen? Amen. Okay. A lot of things you said here I had in slightly different wording. Judges' flaws were apparent. They didn't try to hide them. It's all right there. Here's what they did. Here's what they did right. Here's what they did wrong. Look at, get the story of Gideon. I love looking at Gideon. How many is it? I'm putting out a fleece. I'm putting out a fleece. I'm putting out a fleece. Hear people say that. You guys do realize that Gideon putting out a fleece was a sign of his unbelief, not a sign of his belief, right?
Yeah.
God already told him what to do. He's like, I don't think that's really you, God. No. If this is really you, even though I know you already said it, I'm going to put this fleece out. When I come back, if the fleece is wet and the ground is dry, that's you. Comes out, fleece is wet, ground is dry. Let's do this again. There's a reason he did it twice. It was not because he had faith, okay? So, they had flaws. They didn't hide their flaws. There were times where there were no judges. Okay? Don't want to skip anything, but I don't want to go too long. Judges were dispensable. Why could a judge lead the charge? because if one judge died, God would raise up another one. Never happened. You know why? Because judges had supernatural authority. Judges had supernatural authority, and if they did what God said, God did amazing, incredible things for them. And in the Bible, outside of Simpson, who we won't get into that story, every judge succeeded and died with honor. And they went into impossible situations. Impossible situations. And often, even in those impossible situations, God stripped them down. And I'll tell you something. If the leaders of the church today were willing to take the positions of the judges and that attitude of the judges, they would walk in the same supernatural authority. Walk in the same supernatural authority. Now, what was the problem with the judgeships? We already talked about it. Every time the judges stopped pushing them, they fell into sin. So, my question for you is, and this is not answered in the Bible, how can we as a people institute a proper authority like God wants, a judgeship authority, and the people stay true to their callings and to God? And I'm saying that from a personal standpoint and from our standpoint, because we're looking, aren't we, Billy? We are looking. There's a reason why we keep saying this is an apostolic resource center, because we feel like God wants us to do things that are unique here. We want to find these answers, and we're looking for them. We feel like we have some, but I'm going to do it one more time. Just at your tables, I want you to brainstorm. Give you about 5, maybe 7 minutes again, and just think. If the church had leadership like this, how could they stay true to the calling of God and not fall into half-heartedness? Okay? So go ahead. 5 minutes, maybe 7. We'll see. And this is our last activity. I'm not going to wrap this up with a whole bunch of my great thoughts because I don't have any. We are entering into what I consider largely uncharted territory. So we're just brainstorming. Okay? Let's go ahead and start. Let's start with this table here. What you guys get?
Well, we were just being, sorry, man, can I be the spokesman? But we were just saying that we have to remind ourselves that what we're looking at is actually God's plan. And we're looking at something that's the Old Testament, was before Jesus, before the Holy Spirit. And it was actually before Jesus actually had defeated Satan. And so in that period of time, it was trying to obey and stay within God's plan, which is what judges were put in place, to say this is what God says. You know, and
I'm trying to think how to write that down. That's a good thought, and it gives me a thought that I'm going to bring up later. So, okay. How about this table right here? Sure.
We were talking about vision, sharing vision.
Okay. Sharing the vision.
Yeah.
Telling people what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
So they'll know what's going on.
What God's doing. It's God's vision.
Okay.
He's the one that gave it. Yeah.
Okay.
That way it doesn't go away.
Okay.
But the problem is, where's the commitment? Where's the buy-in? Why do they say it? Or not?
Sure. Make them know this is not about us telling you, this is about you. This is yours for you to own. Okay, excellent. Okay. Anything else in this table? This is great. Don't give me, not pushing for more. Yeah, guys back here.
We were confused.
Okay, that's fine.
We just said Billy and Isabel.
Listening to Billy and Isabel over here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, how about this table here?
But then finding and sharing, share the vision with the people, then it's your responsibility to find their particular spiritual gifts and their physical gifts so that they can be a part of fulfilling the vision.
Yeah, it's no point in telling people to follow their gifts so they don't find them, right?
Right.
And that's our job, which is what we're going to talk about. Maybe it's not next week, week after. That's our job, is helping people find their gifts. Because once you have a gift, then you're going to have a reason to pursue it.
Then you need to train them in those gifts and then provide opportunity for them to use those gifts. And then, yeah. then
Wait,
that
wait.
they
Are you
find-
trying to tell me that the church should be a training session?
Yes.
Ah.
Ephesians 4:11.
There we go, right? Okay,
Then they have purpose in their life.
absolutely.
And they have to learn to be dependent upon the Holy Spirit and hear God in that position that they're in, so that God is more real to them. And it's not just rules and regulations, not just
Mhm.
come to this church service, come to the conference, and that's it.
Okay.
Okay, you
Yeah.
are actually a part of the vision. So you have a destiny within it then.
And telling people, oh, you're going to teach the third grade Sunday school class is not finding their gifts. No, no. In fact, once you're not there pushing, it stops, doesn't it? Okay. This table here.
I think we got, acknowledge or recognizing, the delegated authority came from God.
Okay. Okay. And anything else?
Well, you're kind of talking about, like, if you're growing up in a culture, say you're a kid and you're in a culture, there's a judge who you see, you're 3 years old, you hear stories at home, mom and dad at dinner talking about, man, the judge did this, blah, blah, and look what God did for them. And then they're 7 years old, it's a different judge now, and the same thing. And you're seeing this culturally happen where the supernatural ability or authority that this person has is from God, and the culture is based out of God's love for us. He gave us this judge, and then he gives his authority to that person, and that's why we're protected. It causes that kid, that person to grow up knowing that if I follow in those footsteps, not that I'll ever be a judge, but I have no problem volunteering. I have no problem submitting to that kind of a leader because they follow God's love, and I want to do that. So I'm good there.
Okay. Trying to think of how I put this. You know, instead of putting it, writing it up, I think I'm going to tell the story real quick. In fact, 2 stories real quick, then they'll be done. When I was in Bible school, okay, I was praying about, what God wanted for me to do and stuff. And God gave me a vision that I've never forgotten. I can see it in my mind as clear as it is today. And in this vision, I was glowing with light, and people were just attracted to that light and kept coming and were standing looking at me. And then as I was standing there just glowing and they're all coming to this light, after a while, I started kind of turning a little transparent, a little more transparent, a little more transparent. And the people who were looking at me suddenly started realizing that the light they saw coming from me was actually coming from behind me. And it was the Lord. And I kept growing more and more transparent until the day come when I stepped out and it was just them and the Lord. They didn't know I was gone. And I realized that that's my job. My job is to lead people to Jesus. There is a time where they're looking at me, but if I do my job well, I bring them to Him, and then they end up seeing Him. And I think that's yeah. And I'll end with one last little story. This happened back in the charismatic renewal movement. There was a pastor that wrote a book, and don't laugh, Name of the book is called Brethren Hang Loose. Okay, so this is hippie time, okay? So Brethren Hang Loose, book's really hard to find. In fact, I went on the internet, I think I bought the last known copy in the universe just 2 days ago, so sorry, you can't get it. Okay, I'll loan you mine, maybe, okay? But anyway, it's a great book. And this pastor, height of the charismatic renewal movement, and God challenges him. You know, he says, Lord, you know, my church is doing okay, but nothing's really happening. We're not growing. You know, the people aren't walking in ministries. What do I do? The Lord says, you really want to know? He says, yeah. Will you do what I tell you to? Yeah. Okay. So what do you want me to do? He said, stop. Stop what? Stop everything. Stop pushing. He said, every ministry that you're pushing, stop. Stop pushing. He said, okay, so what do you want me to do? Go in your office, sit with me. Just have time with me. So his pastor stopped pushing. He said the first month that he stopped doing this, he lost 4 choirs. Because he was calling people, come, you know. And he said, okay, lost 4 choirs. Some of the people are leaving the church. Lord, is this really what you want? Yeah. He's sitting here just praising God, just worshiping God all day long. You know, goes in his office, that's his job. Sit there and worship God. Other things start falling. Other ministries start disappearing. He says, Lord, this can't be right. Just wait. After a while, he says, Lord, I know I'm doing this wrong. He went to his file cabinet, he pulled it out and says, okay, here's the programs, let's start all over again. It says, you'll never see my glory. You do that. Okay, back to the file cabinet. He's pretty sure that the board's going to fire him by now because he's doing nothing. He stopped. Nothing's happening. His church is at a standstill. Lord, are you sure this is right? Go. 9 months go by. Nothing happens. Finally, 9-month mark, a woman comes into his office and says, Pastor, I'm really awkward. You know, I feel awkward telling you this, but I feel like God wants me to start a home fellowship in my home and invite all my neighbors. Could that be God? He says, yeah. She said, will you come and lead it to get me started? Okay. So he goes and shows up. Here's a room full of unsaved people that this woman's all brought in. And they sit there, they start asking him questions that he had no idea what the answer was for because he was used to church people and church people questions. These are people of the world, or worldly people questions. And he's like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the answer to these questions, but I'll go home and look it up. If you come back next week, I'll try to have some answers. I said, okay. And they came back, and then he tried to answer their questions. These people started getting saved. And another woman came and said, I feel like I started a home fellowship. And led by God, not by him, not by his programs, not by saying, we're going to divide up the map according to zip codes, and we're going to have, okay, let's see, who can we have for cell group leaders? Oh, Paul, you'd be a good cell group leader. And, oh, you know, Mary, you'd be a good cell group leader. Instead of doing that, he let God call and draw the people to their callings and their ministries. 3 months later, his church was so full they had to go to double services. The power of God was rippling through their services. He said his church was transformed within a year because he stopped pushing and let God.
What's the name of it?
Huh? Brethren Hang Loose.
No, I know. Brethren Hang Loose, but the brother's name.
It's like Gerard. I got a copy on order. I'll loan it to you.
Really?
Should be here in a couple days.
What's your name?
Okay, does anybody have any questions after all that? Is this good, guys?
Yes.
This is good. Billy, you want